All right, peeps. On today's episode of The Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering one question from the Patreons. Lots of gems, lots of adaptation, and lots of, the KFG knows the JKD politics, and he still doesn't give a f***. Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts.
Watch out!
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Sifu. What's good with you, man?
Yeah, sometimes we just got that energy.
You look different.
I have an extra glow about me today, despite the fact that I've actually been going through some health shit lately.
Okay, what?
Which I'll discuss. But the reason why I have this glow,
okay,
and I'm gonna announce it here because I want the podcast fans to know. At the time of this recording,
oh, he's doing it.
He's doing it.
They solved Tupac's murder. Holy shit! Isn't that crazy?
Whoa. Yes,
that is why
justice for Tupac,
and no other reason.
No other reason whatsoever.
Why I have a special glow today.
I kind of feel like I'm glowing too.
You're glowing too, perhaps for the same reason. You're also excited. By the way, you were the one who texted me about it.
Oh,
and then I was like, oh man, I looked it up. Yeah. So they figured it out. Yeah, it had to do with that. It had to do with that fight in the MGM before, which everyone suspected, but they just didn't have the goods, and now they got the goods because one of those guys. After 30, the problem is after 30 years of getting away with something, people start, what do they say? Loose lips sink ships.
Yep.
All right, there you go.
That's it.
That is the only reason why I'm so excited today.
Definitely the only reason.
Definitely the only reason. Okay.
No other.
So
reason.
Anyway, I mentioned very briefly that I was going through some health stuff. All right, and because we haven't recorded an episode, we recorded an episode last night.
Month.
So that was the yesterday's episode, which for people who are listening to this would be last week's episode, where Mikey and I did part one of our Hong Kong recap. That was the first episode.
Hong Kong recap.
Yeah, we did a Hong Kong recap. Ooh. I was like, oh, we need to have Dre here, and I'm like, wait, he didn't come to Hong Kong with us. So now you'd be
more's the pity. We wanted you there.
We wanted you there.
I wanted.
Yeah. Next year. Okay.
Next year.
So anyway. We recorded the episode yesterday, and we just started gushing about our awesome Hong Kong trip, and I failed to mention because since we didn't record an episode for 4 weeks, I didn't want people to see the episode and go like, "Yo, is the KFG is he doing okay?" All right, because I also haven't posted that much on social media, so I just wanted to let everyone know. On the last 2 days of my Hong Kong trip, I got the virus of unknown origins.
Oh,
okay, for the first time, I might add. Right,
I've heard of that virus,
and it was a bit of a doozy.
That was your first.
That was my first time.
You never forget your first.
You never forget your first.
You never forget your first.
You do occasionally remember your seconds.
Oh,
all right.
Man.
So, but anyway,
I did not know that was your first.
It was my first. And I on the last couple of days of my trip, I felt really run down. And as Mikey can attest, I was running around like a chicken with its head cut off in Hong Kong. So the last couple of days, I was really run down, but we had so much to do. We were still meeting with, and we're doing all this stuff. And I'm like, I feel a little worn out, but I thought it was just because of the fatigue. Because from the moment I got into Hong Kong with the whole tour with the 25 people and everything,
nonstop.
Sifu was there, my Seng was there. It was like nonstop from morning to night. I would look in the morning. I would train someone at 7 a.m. in Kowloon Park. I would do my own physical training. I would have breakfast. Then at 10 a.m., I would lead the tour where we would be somewhere walking, hiking, going here, going there until about 3 p.m. We would take a short break. And then in the evening, we would have part two of whatever we were doing that day.
I got to see a video the other day. Yes. Of, what was it, Michael, somebody posted something?
Kevin Mail. Yes. So there are a bunch of vlogs. We talked about this on the last episode. So Kevin Mail, who is one of the guys who was on the tour, he posted the first kind of recap of the tour. So Kevin, his last name is Mayle. So if you look him up, to a Hong Kong trip or whatever, he was fast. He a day after he got back from Hong Kong, he posted that one already, right? And then shortly after that, our boy Bruno, who goes by Bruce Willow on his social media, made 2 vlogs for day 1 and day 2, which were awesome. And they're out. They've been out. And now our boy Andrew, at the time of this recording, has come out with about 3, which are amazing because his thing is travel log, vlogs. And his looks like like something you would see on like a CNN Anthony Bourdain thing.
Wow.
It's like so good.
Oh, and those are out now too.
At the time of this recording, there are 3 out. But those 3 only went to like day 2 or day 3. So I suspect by the time this episode comes out, he's released a bunch more. And they're really amazing. We'll put the links to those in the description below.
Well, you know what it is about Andrews as well? It's just like, did you ever see Globe Trekker?
No.
Globe Trekker, British.
No, Globe Trekker was on PBS. It was awesome, right? And it had like 3 different presenters, right, who went to the most incredible places. I just watch it and go, how did you get this job? I want this job.
Yes.
And one of those guys was this bad-toothed English guy with a really big Cockney accent. I think his name was Ian or something.
As he said, with a really big Cockney accent. There was a moment there where I'm like, where's this going?
And I was just there, and I was just like, you know what? That was the only thing from Miss Andrew's vlogs was me with my big Cockney accent.
That's right. That's right.
That was missing.
Globe Trekker style.
You may have missed your colleague, Mikey Deane.
I have. I also missed all those vacations. But anyway.
So anyway, he did amazing vlogs. And by the Andrew obviously is also our editor, who probably does less of a stellar job editing this episode than he does his own vlogs. The number of times I go like, Andrew, you left like 6 F-bombs in that last one there.
No, we can tell where his heart is.
Yeah, exactly, right?
It's funny, I was just talking to him about a past episode, and I was like, just mentioned a couple of things, and his response to me was like, that was before Hong Kong, so that was past me's problem.
Wow, the past.
Good. Now that he's been to Hong Kong
myself.
with me, maybe he'll step up all the editing, right?
Yeah.
He knows what a great host I was in Hong Kong. So anyway, on the last couple days, I contracted the virus of unknown origins.
I thought it was just. What do they call it?
No, you don't. The reason you don't say it is because they demonetize your video by saying those words.
Covington.
Andrew. Do your magic, all right? Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to
the
talk about
virus
that
of
MMA fighter.
unknown origins.
Got
Okay,
it.
all right. And then by the time I got funny for you, but it's demonetizing my channel. All right. I said it. All right. So. My co-host, ladies and gentlemen. So anyway, by the time I got to New York, I felt like I had been eaten by a buffalo and shit over a cliff.
Oh, damn.
I was on the taxi. I was in the taxi on the way from JFK back to my place. By the way, I knew that I felt like I was coming. I wore a mask the whole trip on the way back to Hong Kong. I didn't think I had COVID. I thought I was.
Hey. You mean
I didn't think I had the
Covington?
virus of. Sorry. Okay, I can't yell at you for that. I just made the same mistake.
Hilarious.
Yes. Bleep that out, please. I didn't realize I had the virus of unknown origins. I thought I just had a flu.
Okay.
But I knew that I was going to be traveling on a plane. So I still masked up and everything, right? Because I was like, I just feel like crap and I'm going to be in a plane for 16 hours. I don't want to give this to anyone, right? So when I got in the taxi in JFK, I had my suitcase was so heavy because every time I go to Hong Kong, everyone's like, "Yo, KFG, there's like this awesome, big, huge, oversized print book from Shannon Ma with the Bruce Lee prints. Yeah, can you bring me like 6 of those? Can you bring me a bunch of Lee Kong Man shirts? Oh, can you bring me a bunch of this super ultra rare thing in Hong Kong? I'd rather not pay the shipping. Yeah, but then I'm carrying a 100-pound suitcase, right?
Man. Oh,
so
man.
anyway, I get it
Such
off
a
at
nice
JFK,
guy.
and like. I had no strength because of the virus of unknown origins. I'm picking up here I am, the Kung Fu genius, normally like, the shining example of fitness and mobility. And here I'm going, trying to pick this thing up.
Uber driver didn't help you?
And no, was this a normal taxi driver? No, I mean, they help you put it in there. But once I was in the taxi, I was like, I slunk down where like I'm like sitting like this all the way down. And I slept the whole way and I could barely get my suitcase because I live in a New York apartment. There's like 3 floors up.
Oh, right.
I had to walk up.
Lug it up.
I laid down on the couch.
Damn.
And I was so wiped out. And I go, this is more than just jet lag or whatever. So I took a rapid test of the virus of unknown origins and I was positive. And I was like, oh man.
Damn.
And so for the week, it was brutal. So I isolated myself. I took care of myself. But then after I had a really bad like post virus of unknown origins fatigue where like if I wrote emails for 15 minutes, I had to rest for an hour and a half. And if I had to like get up and go to the other side of the apartment to grab something to drink, that was a 45-minute rest just for that. It was and I was so worried, like, oh man, am I going to have the long version of the virus of unknown origins, like the long-term side effects? And then, so for the last 4 weeks, basically since I got back from Hong Kong, not only was I suffering from the virus of unknown origins, but also the effects afterwards. And one of the weird things it did is it killed my appetite. And even though now my energy is coming back, and I still eat about 1 meal a day. And if you put all of my favorite foods in front of me right now, I'd be like, cool story, bro. I'm not hungry. So my appetite is getting back incrementally. So every day I eat a little bit more. And when I do have hunger, which is rare, I'll gorge myself to get as many calories as I can, because I've lost almost 15 pounds since Hong Kong. So I didn't want anyone to think like, something was wrong. All right. Every day I'm getting better. But the other thing is I have not worked out since Hong Kong. And this is the longest I have not trained since I started doing martial arts, most likely. Wow. So I haven't done any of my own personal training. I haven't done any, I haven't hit the dummy. I haven't hit the bags. I haven't done anything.
Had the energy.
No, I haven't had the energy, but I have been teaching. So I have enough energy to teach. And I have been doing, chi sao in the private lessons and stuff, but nothing super intensive or rigorous. I am getting better though, day by day. And I am going to start working out again next week. But just in case, and this is also, by the way, the reason why I haven't posted much on my social media, or the stuff that I did post was like older stuff, or from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, I was great, feeling great, in shape, doing my thing. And since that time, I've been looking like I said, like I had been eaten by a buffalo and shit over a cliff. But now I'm coming out of it. And I also think that this news of the solving of Tupac's murder is helping me get my appetite and energy back.
Oh, yes.
So anyway, before we get started, the best way to support the Kung Fu Genius is on Patreon. Patreon.com/The Kung Fu Genius. For as little as $5 a month, you can support your favorite Kung Fu podcast from New York City and get access to episodes early, as well as my Instagram subscriber reels, without also having to subscribe to me on Instagram. So definitely appreciate the help there. Also, there are higher levels of support where you get all sorts of different goodies, and I occasionally put some extra little clips and things like that on Patreon that we normally don't put here on the regular channel. And moving forward, for the Ask Me Anything episodes, the AMAs, I'm only taking questions from our Patreon supporters. So if you want to ask me a direct question for me to answer on this podcast, you got to be on Patreon. Now, for those of you who are not on Patreon, you can still support us by liking this video, obviously subscribing to the channel, sharing these things on your social media platforms. And don't get me wrong, if you are not supporting us on Patreon, what's wrong with you? It's like $5. It's like less. It's like, you know what? I get this juice at Starbucks. It's like a vitamin blast thing. The thing costs $5.91. All right, it's okay.
It's
all right?
tiny.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like
tiny.
water.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you can support us on Patreon, but if you don't, liking these videos, sharing these videos, and obviously subscribing to the channel is a huge help. But also commenting and also arguing with each other, like you guys always. Oh no, Bruce Lee didn't learn this. Oh no, screw you. Oh no, this guy doesn't know Jeet Kune Do. No, that guy knows Jeet Kune Do. Man, your Wing Chun sucks. Feel free to write all of that in the comments because it helps the algorithm. I think it's a trash fire, but YouTube likes it, okay? So please feel free to trash each other in the comments, all right? Say all the things in the comments you wouldn't dare say to that person face to face, all right? Go to town. But anyway, you can definitely support us by doing those things. Now, although we're not taking Ask Me Anything questions from our general YouTube population anymore, you can still comment and give us suggestions for topics, because what we're going to do now is we're going to do fewer Ask Me Anything episodes, maybe just one a month or something like that. And I like to do these deep dives where either we take one question from Patreon and make it the whole episode, which is what we're going to do today, or we'll do multiple questions. But most of the other episodes are going to be one episode is one topic. I'm going to talk
always from Patreon.
Well, the topic is whatever I feel like talking about. We will still take topic suggestions from our YouTube audience, like if they want me to talk about something, but specific questions are just for our Patreon peeps only. So anyway, without any further ado, I found a Patreon question, which I think would be suitable for a topic. All right. So I got it here for you. You can read that to me. All right. It's from Lee Holmes, one of our longtime Patreon supporters.
Okay, here we go.
So what if you could transport back in time for a front row seat into the life and legacy of one of the most respected Wing Chun masters in history? Gong Sao Wong, a tribute direct students on Sifu Wong Sa Leung, offers you just that. Through a series of exclusive conversations, 25 direct students share anecdotes, reflections, and personal stories offering in-depth understanding of the man behind the legend. Order your copy today across 12 Amazon marketplaces with free shipping. I absolutely love this book, and I think you'll find it an indispensable part of your collection. I can't recommend it enough. Get yours today. Go to Amazon, type in Gong Sao Wong, and there you go.
Here we go. Lee Holmes
That's what's up.
is asking a hypothetical.
Oh, no, he's not.
No?
No. He's not asking a
Oh, no, wait.
hypothetical.
It says couple of questions for possible future episode.
Yes.
Number 1, I've heard you mention in previous episodes about your early transition from an adapted version of Wing Chun to a traditional approach with the intention of evaluating Bruce Lee's modifications. I'm assuming you didn't agree with his adaptations, and I was wondering if you, Sifu Alex Richter, could discuss some of the things, in your opinion, that Bruce may have gotten wrong in his modifications.
Yes.
Interesting
This is
question,
interesting,
Lee
right?
Holmes.
Yes, very interesting question. That's why, for our Patreon supporters, I put a post and I said, hey guys, if you have questions for an AMA episode, put it here. But occasionally the questions are so good, I'm like, that's a whole episode right there. That's not just like one of 5 questions, right? We can get into that. So let's get into that. So for our listeners who've been listening to us for a while and they've heard a little bit about my history.
They know you well.
Yeah, no, I still get people go, yeah, you call yourself Kung Fu Genius? After I've explained the story multiple times.
That's still gonna
you weren't here,
happen,
but
though.
in the last week's episode, I told the story again, my origin story of Kung Fu Genius and why it's sarcastic, self-deprecating. I don't consider myself a Kung Fu genius.
The least.
All right? And I'm going to ask Andrew to take that one little clip from that episode and we'll make it a solo clip so that anytime some chucklehead in the comments go, yeah, well, I'm not the one calling myself genius. I'm just going to put that link there.
Oh.
All right? And be like,
this is,
dude,
yeah.
yo, research some shit before you try to talk shit. All right? Okay? So anyway. So for people who've listened to the podcast for a while, they know that my first introduction to Wing Chun was not a classical or traditional Wing Chun. It was a modified, kind of modernized version of Wing Chun.
Yeah.
The style that I took, the specific lineage was called Chun Wing Chun. Chun Wing Chun means those words literally translate to something like it is a faithful descendant of the Wing Chun style. But what it actually is, it's a variation of, well, it's difficult to say variation because it is its own standalone style. So sometimes when you say something is a variation or a spin-off, it sounds almost like you're degrading it, but not at all. I think Chunjo Wing Chun is a very complete system of Wing Chun because they address the different ranges of combat, ground fighting. It's a very modern take on it, and I'm very grateful
It's still around?
to Sifu Johan Sassenuk for introducing it to me. I think the founder, John Bial, I think he closed the original Green Lake School, but he might still be teaching somewhere, and he may have students who are still teaching somewhere. My Sifu eventually left John Bial, as it seems to be the case with a lot of people at some point. They tell their old Sifu to I got to go do my own thing or whatever, but they're still friendly from what I understand.
All right.
But basically, John Bial was a student of James DeMille. James DeMille, as many people know, was, I think most people regard him as Bruce Lee's third student, after Jesse Glover and Ed Hart. And James DeMille took what he learned from Bruce Lee and he actually codified it. So he structured it a little bit because one of the problems in general with Bruce Lee's teachings, whether you're talking about the early Seattle period or the Oakland period or the LA period or whatever, is this kind of codification.
So there was a problem with his early teachings.
No, it wasn't there. No. What I just said is, it's the same problem with all of the phases of Bruce Lee, okay? Yeah. There's no one who can say with any authority what the Seattle curriculum was, or what the Oakland curriculum was, or what the LA Chinatown curriculum was. There are people who will make claims about it, but the only claim anyone can make, especially in regards to Bruce Lee, in my opinion, for what he taught, is they can only claim the curriculum as they were taught it, or as was maybe taught within a specific period of that timeline. So if you talk about the LA Chinatown period, you're talking about a period of a few years. You're also talking about a period where Bruce Lee was teaching for a little bit, then Dan Inosanto was teaching. So was it the same curriculum? Was it a little bit different? Because we even know from the Dan Lee phone conversation that we listened to that while Bruce Lee was still alive, that Bruce Lee, knew that Dan Inosanto was already teaching some things that were a little bit different from what he was doing.
Okay.
And this was stuff that was already going on during Bruce Lee's lifetime. This isn't stuff that happened years later. And the reason why you know that there's no agreed upon curriculum, like what was the Seattle curriculum? All right, because the early version was different than the version he taught shortly before he left. And what Taki Kimura taught was different from what Jesse Glover taught, which was different from what James DeMille taught. So, and those are all examples of people who trained with each other under Bruce Lee in Seattle. So you cannot say, you could say, yeah, Taki Kimura was the one with the JKD certificate, but that's only because perhaps of some circumstances between Jesse Glover and James DeMille and Bruce Lee at the time that they left. But you cannot necessarily say that Taki Kimura was better than Jesse Glover by no stretch of the imagination, or James DeMille. You could just say that they were different, right? But therein lies the rub. You cannot say this was the Seattle curriculum because Bruce was constantly changing it. And what everyone got was a little bit different. Same thing with the Oakland curriculum. Same thing with the curriculum in Los Angeles. So the problem is, and also it's partially by design, especially later as Jeet Kune Do became more and more philosophical. Then you have this whole dichotomy, whether it's a true dichotomy or not, between Jun Fan Kung Fu, like the techniques that Bruce Lee did, and Jeet Kune Do being a philosophy, or Jeet Kune Do being about the 5 ways of attack and timing and rhythm and distance, and Jun Fan Kung Fu being an earlier version or whatever. The problem is, if you took 10 different JKD people or Seattle era people and put them in a room, they would only agree on the fact that there was a guy named Bruce Lee. Okay, so the problem is, and I am not a JKD guy. I am not a Wing Chun Do guy or any of that. So I don't have any skin in the game. I'm just the guy sitting on the outside. My friend Dwight Woods, who I've been on his podcast many times, the JKD Rebel. Every week, it's like he has to talk about this dichotomy between original JKD and JKD concepts. And it's like they have an almost existential crisis in JKD because the founder had a lot of contradictory quotes about, if people fuss about the name JKD, then let the name of JKD be done with altogether. But then he'll also say JKD is this, this, and this. So it's like he is defining it, but then he's also saying it's beyond definition. And then he's also saying JKD is basically whatever you make of it. And then he's saying if you're doing this, this, and this, it's not JKD. So Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do and Bruce Lee's notes are very much like the Bible. You can quote mine it for whatever you want the Bible to mean for you. If you want it to be about peace and love, you can quote mine those specific quotes and see there. And if you want it to be about, I came not to bring light but the sword, you know what I mean? And about all hell and, brimstone and hellfire and stuff like that, you can find that. Yeah. If you want to make God out to look like a loving dude, you can find those quotes. And if you want to make him out to be a genocidal maniac, those quotes are also very easy to find. So the problem is anyone can quote mine Bruce Lee's JKD notes or his writings and be like, see? And what usually happens, whether you're in the kind of Dan Inosanto camp or you're in the original JKD camp, is people like the version they learned. And, so if you're in the original JKD camp, well, that's what you learned. You probably think your Sifu's a swell guy. And you're going to be partial to that worldview that the original JKD that was based on what Bruce Lee taught during his lifetime, which, again, is a very difficult thing to nail down. That's the only real one. And then the other people, perhaps more in the Dan and Santo camp, are going to say, well, Jeet Kune Do is a philosophy.
Yeah.
It needs to evolve.
That's the camp I was in.
Yeah, it has to change with the times. You cannot be stuck. You cannot create routines and stuff. And the thing is, there really decent arguments on both sides, but it also depends. It's a little bit like right wing, left wing. It's like we all tend to skew a little more conservatively in the way like we like to preserve things, and some people skew slightly more open-minded. And I'm not saying people who are like more conservative are not at all open-minded. I'm just saying that people have this viewpoint, and that is the filter by which they see things. So they will filter anything they read from Bruce Lee, and they will literally pick out all the stuff that supports their view and ignore the stuff that doesn't. So when it comes to whether people are part of this JKD camp, that JKD camp, or they think the original Seattle era non-classical Kung Fu stuff before Bruce Lee created Jeet Kune Do is better, they're going to quote mine Bruce Lee to support those things. Because what they're doing is they begin with a conclusion. And then they find the facts to support it. Now, that's not actually how logic works. Because logic works, you have to find the facts, and the conclusion is based on the facts. But most people do it the opposite. Yeah. They have their conclusion because they like stuff. It's a liking bias. And then they build the facts backwards to support it.
Wow.
All right? And the thing is that I've toyed with this idea. I don't know what you guys think about it, all right?
All right.
Because I don't have any skin in the game as a JKD guy, all right?
Me neither.
But I know the arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
And I've toyed with the idea of doing one episode where I completely champion original JKD. And for like an hour on KFG, I'm going to tell you why. Look, original JKD is the only real one. And if you've changed it, you're not doing what Bruce Lee did. And I could literally do that for an hour and have very convincing arguments. The next episode, I could do the same thing for Jeet Kune Do concepts. I have the exact opposite one because I've read the arguments on both sides.
Okay.
As someone who doesn't have any skin in the game, I go, that's what these people think. That's what those people think. And then people always ask me, well, which one do you think is right? And I go, well, I don't have an opinion on that. And people find that hard to believe because I'm such a Bruce Lee nerd. But I'm just going to say openly on the KFG podcast as an established Wing Chun Sifu, I don't care about Jeet Kune Do politics. I literally don't care. I have really good friends in the Dan and Santo camp.
Yeah.
Dr. Mark Cheng. He is the godfather of my eldest daughter, right?
Right.
He is my brother. He's Dan and Santo's student, and I love everything he does, and I love his take on martial arts, and I totally love that.
Yeah.
Vincent Benitez.
Yeah.
All right. Our boy Vincent.
Shout out to
all
Vince.
Right? The Jersey Monk.
Okay.
He's a total original JKD guy all the way. I love him. He's great. When he talks about JKD, I love it. I agree with him.
Okay.
All right. Because they're valid points. The problem is when we want to come to a conclusion with which one is better, that's very difficult in martial arts because ultimately the martial art you think is better is the one that you like and the one that works for you. And everyone seems to be dissatisfied if other people don't think the way they think.
Damn.
And it's like, but what I find is that it belies in insecurity.
Okay.
Say, for example, you really believe in Jeet Kune Do concepts, okay? That Bruce Lee's idea is that Jeet Kune Do should free us from the shackles of traditional martial arts, from a very Krishnamurti kind of like free your mind from the dogma and the shackles of following a leader and a guru and all these things, and research and create something that is specifically your own, right? That is an awesome mindset. You know what I mean? I'm totally, completely behind that. And I don't think that anyone could really find too much fault in that. You know what I mean? And that is a very open worldview, and I think that that's great. But I don't care if that's how you want to view Jeet Kune Do. If that was my viewpoint, and I really believed in it, let's say I'm like a JKD concept guy, Jeet Kune Do is about freeing your mind. If you're just going to restrict yourself to Jun Fan Kung Fu prior to 1973, you're putting yourself in a box, all right? But I really enjoy my Jeet Kune Do concepts. then why do I care if someone disagrees or does something else? Why would I, as a hypothetical Jeet Kune Do concepts guy, care that someone else would prefer to do original JKD? But it's almost like people are a little insecure because if they're original JKD people out there, in their mind, those people are thumbing their nose at their own existence. Like, I believe in this totally logical, valid way of using Jeet Kune Do as a vehicle to open your mind and to not be stuck and shackled or whatever. But that guy, he only wants to do the original JKD, and by using the same name, he's kind of ruining my flow.
Damn.
And in my mind, I go, why do you give a what someone does who's not your student, not at your school, and if you just didn't pay any attention, you wouldn't even know that they existed? Because I find that there's a little bit of insecurity. They're not completely sure of their point unless other people are convinced as well, because they need a consensus. And I will tell you, consensus is overrated.
Man.
Okay? Man, they voted Hitler into power in Germany, okay?
Yeah, that was the consensus.
Is overrated, okay? All right?
I mean, that's not actually strictly true.
What?
Okay, he fudged things a little bit, okay? Some false flags burning of the... I get it, okay? But still...
Not to defend the man. I'm just saying, like, he was terrible, but...
He's...
What? Someone hacked the polls?
He's defending Hitler, okay? Let me know that Mikey Deane is defending Hitler, okay?
This is just... I am being... Oh, because now I'm not on camera, I am being absolutely, like... What's it? Like, taken to task here, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is he being Kanye right now?
I think, yeah.
Kanye-esque?
Yeah. You know what? On the next episode, he's going to show up in a black mask.
Oh, yes.
Mikey,
some Yeezys on.
I'd quit while you're ahead. All right?
There's no being ahead.
So
I'm
anyway,
behind.
Consensus is overrated. You know, if you really believe something and you're confident in it, first of all, you should always be open to other viewpoints, because you don't want to be closed off where you're like, I'm so confident in what I'm doing, I don't listen to any other viewpoints. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that if you've really thoroughly investigated what you do and you continually try to refine your mindset, at some point you should be pretty confident you're doing the best you can do with what you're given. And to spend an obnoxious amount of time because other people out there don't agree with you comes off as being unconfident. Why do people even care? And if I am an original Jeet Kune Do guy, where I believe that all the best stuff, the bee's knees, is what Bruce Lee taught up until his untimely death. Strong side, straight lead, you know, the intercepting idea there, the kind of fast Wing Chun traps on the inside, you know, kind of some fencing ideas in the long distance with some boxing framework, and then some Wing Chun when you're close. That's it. That's it for me. I really like it. I like Bruce Lee. I think he was a genius. That's what I want to practice. That is what makes me happy. You have 4,000 weeks on this earth. If you make it into your mid to late 70s, you got to do what's happy. You're like, fuck it. I like original Jeet Kune Do. Why do I have to constantly defend myself against someone who's like, yo, bro, if you're not doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and your JKD, you're just totally stuck in a box. Yeah, but here's the thing. I have one life. And I like original Jeet Kune Do. It makes me happy. But no, bro, the JKD concepts guys are in your face, and you have to now defend your original JKD against a constant slew of new school guys saying, yeah, but if you're not doing this and not doing that, you're not up with the times. Why do people give a shit so much? Look, I'm not saying don't be open. I'm not saying, look, I'm saying original JKD people who are totally into that stuff should still keep a little eye out to what's going on in the grappling world, what's going on in, you know, what other, don't just stay in that stuff. But doesn't mean you have to teach it. Doesn't mean you have to mix it, but you should know. How's a grappler going to try to take you down? What are the liabilities if you go to the ground? And maybe JKD concepts guys can be all for their so-called open-mindedness, but maybe also keep in mind that the specialization that Bruce Lee advocated could also be helpful, that maybe you cannot really be good at everything. And I know even just saying that is a loaded statement, JKD concepts people, we're not trying to be good at everything, we're trying to integrate things according to the concept. yeah, you're also trying to be good at a lot of different martial arts. All right, okay. So maybe you could also specialize a little bit. Maybe you can both learn a little bit from each other and spend a lot less time delivering messages online trying to convince a group that is not going to be convinced. You're not going to convince one sect of religion to convert to another one just by berating them constantly, right? And you should spend more time on building your own skills and knowledge and presence and spend less time trying to put down another one.
So many people are confused about basics in Wing Chun Chi Sao. Some view it as a collection of moves, and masters confuse their own students by talking of principles and concepts without telling them what's what. The 15 Chi Sao Fundamentals is my attempt at explaining Wing Chun Chi Sao from a perspective of principles, but also with the basic techniques required to express those principles. It shows the framework for Hong Kong Wing Chun Chi Sao, in particular, the training of Pun Sao and Lap Da. This is necessary training before going on to the higher and more spontaneous expressions of Chi Sao. Right now, if you use the code KFG Chi Sao, you can get a signed copy of my book for the price of the unsigned one. Click on the link in the description below and use the code KFG Chi Sao at checkout to get a signed copy of this full-color, over 230-page manual on the vital foundational training exercise of Wing Chun. This offer is good while supplies last, so get yours today.
This has like been a 35-minute preamble, and I haven't even gotten to the question.
We didn't get to the question.
No, because the problem is, whenever you tiptoe in the tulips of Bruce Lee's JKD and all that kind of stuff, you have to have a massive preamble and throat clearing, because since I'm a Wing Chun guy, if I don't mention that I'm very well aware of the controversies within Bruce Lee's own martial art, the discrepancies between Seattle period and Chinatown period. Some guys saying Bruce Lee abandoned Wing Chun, other guys say he didn't. I know that basically the consensus is that there's no consensus on anything about Bruce Lee. I fully understand that. And by having this 30-minute throat clearing so I can get to my question, I hope I made that clear. That whatever I state about my personal subjective experience about what I understood about what Bruce Lee learned in Wing Chun versus what I discovered in Wing Chun versus what I think Bruce Lee may not have seen in Wing Chun can only be described as my own personal subjective experience. It's not, I can be completely wrong about certain things, but I'm only explaining what I saw. So I'm not trying to make any claims about what Bruce Lee knew, because even though I'm a huge Bruce Lee nerd, this is probably painfully apparent for people who watch this podcast regularly, it should also be painfully apparent that no one is really an authority on what went on between Bruce Lee's two ears. We can speculate based on his notes, based on what he did, based on what he taught, but no one can say, this is exactly how Bruce Lee thought. We know what he wrote, which is a representation of what he thought, but it's not actually what he thought. When I write my books, that is a representation of how I explain Wing Chun in a way that I think I can communicate it to other people. But in my own head, that's not how I formulate it. It's the same information, but it's formulated in my head differently. When I write it down, I write it for a general audience, because in my head, I don't need to write it for a general audience. It's an audience of one in my head. But when you write it in a book, you're writing it for the general audience. It's always going to be formulated differently, even if the idea is the same. So that's why you could have read every single note Bruce Lee wrote. You could have them all memorized, and you only understand a representation of what he thought. Besides the fact that most of what he wrote in his notes were things that he was also, as by James Bishop, these were notes from other books, things that he liked. So many of those things weren't his original ideas, not saying that he was taking them elsewhere, but these were his notes on things that he was writing that weren't necessarily things that came out of his own head. These were things that he liked. Oh, I like that. Oh, this is cool. This is interesting. I can use this. So you would then have to really figure out what his original notes were, things that he wasn't looking at other books for inspiration, and then still understand that even his most original notes are only a representation of what went on in his head, not actually what went on in his head. So you cannot say for certain what Bruce Lee's takes on Wing Chun were. Some of his students might say, this is what Bruce Lee told me about Wing Chun, but this is what Bruce Lee told you about Wing Chun on that day. He may have changed his mind later. Or he may have just told you that because in that moment, that's what he felt like telling you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's correct. Like I here at City Wing Chun, when we teach beginners, sometimes we teach beginners things that I wouldn't teach to my seniors because the senior students have a lot of experience and they can get away with things.
Yeah.
All right. Once you have experience, you can do different things that a beginner would get. They would get clocked if you tried that. But with timing and practice, you can do things that, let's just say, are a little bit more risky. But a beginner, I would say, you never do this. Okay?
All right.
And the reason why I say that is because you have to teach a beginner the safest version of whatever you're teaching that's going to reduce the liability that they're going to get hit.
Oh,
okay?
man.
But for seniors, I say, okay, look, well, based on the angle coming in, you can go this way, you can go this way, you can even opt to go like this, right? Because with your own experience, you know the liabilities of it, right? But if that beginner quit after a few months, and then I died, and years later they wrote about what I taught, they would say, Sivo Alex says you never do X, Y, Z. But my senior students would be like, dude, we do X, Y, Z all the time.
Yeah.
Okay? So the problem is we have to look at the limits of knowledge, the limits of perspective, the source, the interpretation, and everyone needs to slow their roll on interpreting Bruce Lee's notes, on interpreting what Bruce Lee's students said, because that is now your interpretation of what someone else said, which is their representation of what they understood. So we are already, by the time you are retelling a story you tell me a story of something that happened between you and your boy.
Yeah.
You are telling a story about something that happens in the past. So maybe you're still telling it in the way
skewed.
you understood it.
Yeah.
Then I'm listening to that and understanding it in the way I understand it. And then I, like every other Wing Chun guy, JKD guy, whatever, say it as gospel truth when it's third hand. Okay? So I think everyone needs to everyone in the Bruce Lee world needs to massively slow their roll.
Take a chill pill.
On how certain they are about whether Bruce Lee still thought Chi Sao was good or not, whether he thought Wing Chun was good or not, what his thoughts on Filipino martial arts were, whether he did this, whether he did that, because we are all interpreting third-hand stories at best at this present time, okay? And that is a very slippery slope of going way off course, all right? So anyway, that's my now 40-minute throat clearing, so I can finally get to this question without JKD guys going, well, Steve Alex, actually Bruce Lee's style was evolving over time, so when you're doing that, right. Got it. Okay? All right.
Goodness.
So, when I started learning Wing Chun as a teenager, like I said, I didn't start with a classical or traditional style of Wing Chun. I started learning this Chunjo Wing Chun, which was John Bial's version of the Wing Chun Do he had learned from James DeMille, which would be a version of Bruce Lee's early period teaching, which is pre-Jeet Kune Do. That stuff was sometimes called non-classical Gong Fu by Jesse Glover.
Okay.
Ed Hart used to just call it the stuff.
The stuff.
And the reason why it was called that is because I think you have to imagine when Bruce was first in Seattle in the very late 50s and early 60s, he had just come from Hong Kong. He was not a qualified Wing Chun instructor by any stretch of the imagination.
All right.
So I think because he had just recently left Hong Kong, I think he had some reservations about saying, I'm a Wing Chun Sifu, because I think he knew deep down he really wasn't.
Oh, wow.
He was someone who had learned Wing Chun for a short time, and he could use it. And I'm not saying that he wasn't effective or he didn't know how to scrap with Wing Chun. For sure he did. But he would probably get laughed at a little bit in Hong Kong if he decided to open a school and say he was a Wing Chun Sifu, given the short amount of time that he had actually learned Wing Chun. Wow. And so I think for that reason, because, and again, it's all perspective. Why didn't Bruce Lee call what he was doing Wing Chun? Well, if you look at from a Chinese traditional perspective, he knew he wasn't a qualified Sifu, so he probably wouldn't dare call it Wing Chun. But then, of course, the take is, well, you don't understand. Well, Mr. KFG, what you don't understand is by the time Bruce Lee came to the States and he saw the Westerners were much bigger than the guys he was used to practicing with in Hong Kong, he realized that the normal Wing Chun he did wouldn't really work the same way. So he had to start modifying it. So because he was already changing it, that's why it wasn't like really Wing Chun anymore. So he couldn't really call. See, I know all
You know
the
that one
arguments.
too?
Like I know all the arguments, okay? And what people don't understand because we have two halves of our brain, we have a tendency to have very dichotomous thinking, black and white thinking. It's either this or that. Bruce Lee either didn't call it Wing Chun because of traditional reasons, or he didn't call it Wing Chun because he was so ultra modern that he wouldn't call it Wing Chun because he was already changing everything or whatever. And when you know anything about human behavior, it's probably a little bit of both. You know what I mean? One feeds the other very easily in that narrative.
Okay.
He knew he couldn't really teach Wing Chun because he wasn't a qualified Sifu, but he also knew that maybe because he wasn't a qualified Sifu, he had to patch some of the gaps of his knowledge up with some ideas, maybe try a little bit of judo with Fred Sato, like do a little bit of this, maybe change his stance a little bit because he didn't quite understand the kind of shifting, turning idea, or maybe he did and he didn't like it, whatever. So it very easily could be a combination of those things, but everyone wants to plant the flag like, no, this is why he didn't call it this. Because what's happening? They are now assuming that they know what was in Bruce Lee's head.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you know exactly why he didn't call it Wing Chun. You know, because Ed Hart would call it the stuff because he said Bruce didn't even give it a name when he was like, oh, we're just going to practice Gong Fu. He would use Gong Fu as a generic term, although we all know that Gong Fu is first of all, it doesn't even mean martial arts. It means your achievement through hard work. It can be used as a colloquially to mean Chinese martial arts, but it's a very vague and open term. So he would just call it Gong Fu, right? But he was just teaching them kind of whatever he felt like teaching, right? But the thing is to go and say, no, Kung Fu genius, this is why Bruce Lee did ABC in Seattle. I just have to say, you don't know. Okay, you can make a claim and you could say, no.
Yeah.
So-and-so said, okay, so-and-so, who's interpreting the information or interpreting what he said and then reinterpreting, and then you hear it and then you're reinterpreting what they're saying. And that is the fact. All right?
Damn.
Calm down. You're on that horse right now. You need to pull those reins in real hard. Real hard on the I know what Bruce Lee's thinking train, okay? All right? That is really difficult to say for sure, all right? Wow. But when Bruce Lee first came to Seattle, I think it could be said without much controversy that what Bruce Lee taught in those first few years in Seattle was closer to the Wing Chun he had learned in Hong Kong than what he maybe taught at later or latter periods in his teaching tenure. Because when he first came to Seattle, he had basically just, he went to San Francisco for a short time, but then he very quickly went to Seattle afterwards. So, people say, well, he actually went to San Francisco but he was in San Francisco for a very short time. He was in Seattle.
How long was he
in I don't remember, maybe a few months, maybe shorter, I don't know. But it wasn't for any significant period of time.
Wasn't a year or
But
two.
basically, for all intents and purposes, he came to Seattle from Hong Kong, all right? And obviously, because he was just fresh off the boat, quite literally at that time, what he was teaching, even if he was already changing some things, it was still more or less the stuff he had learned from his Seng, Wong, and stuff. So it can be argued that the Seattle era stuff is closer to, that's more Bruce Lee's Wing Chun side of things than, say, what he was teaching in 1969, 10 years later in L.A., okay?
All right.
Where he was still teaching some Wing Chun stuff, but, with all the other stuff that he was starting to do. So that's why the early Seattle period where you look at a Jesse Glover, you're looking at James DeMille, you're looking at Ed Hart or Leroy Garcia or, any of these guys who learned from that time period, you're getting a closer glimpse to what Bruce Lee understood as Wing Chun. Because it was before he really started changing, let's say, the framework or making it a little more philosophical. And Chinjo Wing Chun, the style that I did, coming from Wing Chun Do, was a representation of that. They had streamlined some of the methods of training, but for the most part, you're getting a version of what Bruce Lee taught, or at least an understanding of what Bruce Lee taught and what the understanding of Wing Chun was at that time.
Cool.
So that's why I did that for about 3 years, and that gave me insight into how Bruce Lee modified the stance to have one leg forward to drive forward pressure, off the rear leg, and some certain ideas about how Chi Sao was done and how things were applied and stuff. And obviously, there are a lot of things in Chinjo Wing Chun that are also John Bial's creation and idea, and there's a little bit of Ed Hart stuff in there with the stand-up grappling stuff that he was very fond of. But I could say, and then also having had correspondence with Jesse Glover, I have all of Jesse Glover's books and videos at that time, and I watched it. And while some of the details of the stances were different, a lot of the stuff that Jesse Glover was doing was very similar to what I was learning in Chinjo Wing Chun. Just we had a little bit more in terms of padding it out as a self-defense style, and it wasn't just about getting good at 10 things. There were other things in there as well.
All right.
But when I looked at Jesse Glover's stuff and I saw his videos, it wasn't that foreign to me. Like the drop step punch and all that, those were all things that we were practicing. So I was like, okay, so that's the reason why I kind of felt that I had at least a basic understanding of like, all right, like I don't know what Bruce Lee taught day to day, but I see what his students were doing. Right. And that gives me a little bit of a glimpse. And then, of course, I read some of Bruce Lee's articles, and he didn't actually talk about Wing Chun that much, except for maybe the Chi Sao article in Black Belt Magazine, which was much later. But there were like bits and pieces of it. Why didn't Bruce Lee write a lot about Wing Chun in his notes? Because he already learned Wing Chun in Hong Kong. And there were really no Wing Chun books at the time for him to take notes from. So he had nothing to take notes on in terms of Wing Chun. Whatever he came to the States with, that was his Wing Chun, all right? Of course, there are going to be people who claim that Fuk Young taught him a super secret version of Wing Chun, which still... That super secret version of Wing Chun still somehow did not mean Bruce Lee did not have to... There are people that created... Fuk Young taught Bruce Lee such a super awesome version of Wing Chun. Yeah. Yet Bruce Lee still needed to create Jeet Kune Do. So apparently whatever Fuk Young taught him was still not good enough anyway.
Damn.
But I'm not going to get into that can of worms or whatever. I think most of the Fuk Young claims are highly, highly exaggerated.
Okay.
And so in any case, it's not my burden to say... It's given the lack of notes and dedication of what Bruce Lee ever wrote about Fuk Young or what he did, I would say the burden of proof is on them to prove that Fuk Young really did give Bruce Lee all this stuff. Of course, they're going to say he was a very humble guy and didn't want to take credit, and he's also passed away. So it's very easy in hindsight to go like, well,
right,
here's the reason.
Here's
Here's the reason why there's no evidence. All right, and claims without evidence can also just be summarily dismissed. It might be true, but if you don't have evidence, I don't have to listen to it, all right? Because your evidence is someone told you, all right?
Insubmissible.
Exactly. So anyway, having learned Chinjo Wing Chun for 3 years very intensively and studied the books of Jesse Glover, saw the videos of Jesse Glover, and kind of read a little bit about, what Bruce Lee was teaching and doing at that time, especially Bruce Lee's fantastic book, not Bruce Lee's fantastic book, Jesse Glover's fantastic book, between Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do, which John Little also said in their interviews, also one of his favorite books. I think it is one of the best books. I have a little bit of an idea, I think, of what the Seattle era Wing Chun was.
All right.
And so while I had been learning that for a few years, I wanted to learn classical Wing Chun as a teenager, classical or traditional. I don't like to say traditional Wing Chun because William Chang has kind of hijacked that term to mean his specific thing. When I mean traditional, I mean like Bruce Lee was teaching, let's say, his version of Wing Chun. You could say it's a modern version of Wing Chun, all right? Although these are all loaded terms that need to be defended. But let's just, to keep it simple, put it under the rubric of modern Wing Chun, and then you have classical Wing Chun, all right? And why I say modern Wing Chun is because what I was learning in the Seattle era, we didn't do any of the forms. There was no Siunam Tao Cham Kyu or anything like that.
Interesting.
Everything was fighting drills and things like that.
Okay.
And Chi Sao and sparring, all right? So I wanted, but I'm like, yeah, but Bruce Lee learned Wing Chun, and I've always been a Kung Fu nerd. I'm like, I want to learn the Siunam Tao and the Cham Kyu, and I want to learn those things. I want to learn the things that Bruce Lee learned, and see if, having learned classical or traditional Wing Chun, if I would come to the same conclusion that Bruce Lee came to, that, okay, all right, I learned this stuff, and I still think that Bruce Lee's modifications were correct. Or would I go and learn this stuff and go, oh, well, maybe because Bruce Lee only learned Wing Chun for a short time, maybe he didn't learn everything. And then having the ability to learn everything, and this is, of course, years before I knew about Wing Chun politics and who had learned what and all this kind of stuff. But like, This is my young, naive teenage brain. If I learned everything, then I could determine for myself if Bruce Lee's edits were correct or if Bruce Lee's edits were based on partial information. So that was the reason why in my when I was 18, 19, I decided to stop doing that non-classical Wing Chun and go off and, seek some kind of more classic Wing Chun, and which eventually brought me to learning Wing Chun and then training full-time at the castle for a few years, because I really wanted to get into this stuff. And I knew at that time, because in Germany you had fighters like Emin Bostepe, you had all these great European fighters. I go, okay, here's a classical version of Yip Man's Wing Chun, but those guys can fight, because those WT guys, those Langton guys they're fighting a lot, especially the guys in Europe, all right? So that's why that became my path. Because I had gone to some other classical Wing Chun schools in the Seattle area, and I wasn't very impressed with them. Because coming from the Chinjo Wing Chun, we did a lot of sparring, heavy chi sao, it was, gloves and everything. It was very practical, very hands-on. And then I would go into these traditional Wing Chun schools and see a bunch of people leaning backwards, doing these kind of movements very slowly. And I was like, okay, well, that's the Siunam Tao form. I knew what I was looking at, but I'm like, wow, those guys are leaning back. And then watching them do chi sao, and it was like, it's just like, it just felt like some soggy biscuit chakra hippie nonsense, right? Where's the sauce?
Yeah.
All right. Is anyone gonna try to punch someone?
Yeah.
Is anyone gonna try to do something?
When
right?
you leave a crack in the
they're
soup
just
too
there.
long.
Everyone's leaning backwards, going like this, and they're discussing their feelings, right? And I'm going, and I was going like, nah, maybe I think maybe Bruce Lee was onto something. All right. And then it wasn't until I came to Sifu Ralph Hanel in Vancouver. And he just spanked me easily with this Learning Wing Chun. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I have something to learn.
Yes.
So anyway, part of this experiment for me would be like, okay, well, now I'm going to embark on this road of traditional Wing Chun, classical Wing Chun. Let me see if I would come to the same conclusion Bruce Lee did, right? And which is more or less then where this question comes from. So now, having done that all these years later, do I agree with Bruce Lee's edits? And so this is a very interesting question, because it's difficult to separate Bruce Lee's circumstances out of this question. Because I believe that given what Bruce Lee knew about Wing Chun and what he understood about Wing Chun at the time that he came to the US, what he eventually did with it and what it was to develop into, I think was probably the best course of action for him. Now, of course, it's easy to say that in hindsight. He became a big, famous kung fu movie star and created this style or whatever. So it's almost like here I am justifying. I started with the conclusion and then justified the premise. But I think that given what Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee had a very basic, stripped down version of Wing Chun from Wong Sun Leung, basically just stepping in, punching, fighting, basic Pak Sao, Lap Sao, low kick, Chi Sao, go forward, go in, kill. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good foundation to have when you're a scrappy 18-year-old coming to the States in the late 50s.
All right.
And then finding that
he knew he could fight.
Yeah, and then finding out maybe against some bigger guys, he had to use some different angling. Maybe he had to change his stance to 50-50 because he didn't know how to make the more rear-weighted stance work against someone who was like bigger and stronger, because maybe he just didn't have that stuff. But given what he knew, I think everything he did with it was brilliant. Because most people wouldn't dare change what they learned. They would just stick to it.
All right.
And even if they had a hard time using it, they might just think that they just weren't good enough and they needed to practice harder, which, by the way, sometimes is the answer, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And instead, what he did is he engineered something kind of new and figured out a way to make it work. So given what he knew, I totally understand why Bruce Lee did what he did. And I also have to say hats off to him, because I think very few people would have been able to do that with that amount of Wing Chun.
Would you say he was a kung fu genius?
Absolutely. He was the real kung fu genius.
The real kung fu
Not
genius.
this chucklehead you're looking at right now. Okay?
Yeah, you call yourself the kung fu genius.
Yeah.
All right. Everyone calls himself genius.
All right.
If you don't like calling me kung fu genius, then just call me KFG. All right.
There we go.
All right. So anyway, so that's why I go like Bruce Lee was actually really quite brilliant for what he had in his hand at the time he came to the States.
Yeah,
and what
he played his
did with it.
cards and he
But Bruce
came
Lee
out.
made some claims that Wing Chun had only one type of punch. i.e. the straight punch. And for anyone, at least in the Leung Ting system, who's learned the Chum Kyu, we have the lifting punch, which for the layman is a uppercut. In our version of the Buji form, we have the hooking punch, which for the layman is a hook. And then now we don't just do them willy-nilly, all right? There's a specific reason why we would do a hooking punch. It's, spoiler alert, it's a straight punch from the side. We don't stand in front of someone and loop the punch this way here. If I'm holding on to my opponent's arm in front of me and his neck is here, this is the shortest straight line between these 2 points, okay? So it is, to a certain degree, still a straight punch. It's a straight punch from where? Our lifting punch, our uppercut. If my hand is down here and the target is here and I go this way, well, that's also the most efficient line from there to there. But to say that Wing Chun only has a straight punch is factually incorrect. And Bruce Lee did say that in either one of his articles or one of his notes. And then there is the statement from Leo Fong, the late Leo Fong, whom was an Oakland era guy. I feel that, and I know it maybe comes off a little weird saying, I feel that Leo Fong exaggerated some of his stories about Bruce Lee. I feel that, maybe some of the conversations that he said he had with Bruce Lee, I think these are later accretions. I think these are things that, I'm not saying he was intentionally lying or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, there's so little about him from that time period. And based on some of his interviews later, you would think he was like Bruce Lee's right-hand man. He was always there. But he claimed that after the fight with Wong Jack Man, because Wong Jack Man ran away from Bruce like an absolute coward, and that Bruce said to Leo Fong, this is Leo Fong saying it, that, because he only knew the straight punches from Wing Chun, had he known hooks and uppercuts, he could have hit Wong Jack Man from different angles instead of just chasing him with chain punches, because part of what supposedly happened, there are many narratives about the Wong Jack Man fight, and I'm not making any claims about the truth or veracity of what I'm about to say, is that, while Bruce is chasing him with chain punches, Wong Jack Man turned around and Bruce ended up throwing a lot of chain punches towards the back of Wong Jack Man's head, which, we know is actually something I tell you guys not to do. And this knowledge of not chain not chain punching someone in the back of the head, that doesn't come because of a cautionary tale from Bruce Lee. That comes from my Wing Chun teachers in Hong Kong. Okay, so it seems that when Bruce said that there was only one type of punch in Wing Chun, and that was often represented, at least in what he taught, by chain punching. That is, for anyone who's actually learned Wing Chun in any depth, that's actually factually incorrect. So we have other types of punches from other angles. We're also very specific about when and where we chain punch. It's not a multi-purpose tool. Maybe for the beginner a little bit more, but as you advance in Wing Chun, you don't chain punch as much. Just going in and stepping with chain punches when someone's close to you is not the best tactic if you're fighting an elite fighter. But if someone steps in your face and you're like, yeah, bro, calm down, I don't want anything, and they keep coming, you go in and blast them. Okay, that's a different story, okay? For the advanced practitioners, they're going to be doing other things, okay? But it clearly seems like Bruce Lee's main tool was a hammer, to which every solution had to be a nail. And that hammer was chain punching. And there he was chain punching Wong Jack Man in the back of the head, which is something I tell my students in like the first 2 weeks. If your opponent turns, you cannot use a closed fist on the back of the skull. You have to change it to palm strikes. Ooh. You have to find another way to hit. And then the idea that if someone was running away from you and didn't want to engage, you would normally just let them go and be like, all right, you don't want to fight? You just want to run away? Come and fight me or get the hell out of my gym.
Right.
But we have passing steps in Wing Chun. We have the use of kicks. We have clinches. We have the neck pulling hand. We have close range elbows, punches from different angles, takedown sweeps, trips, all of this stuff. So to say the idea that the only tool against a runner is to just get on your horse and chain punch someone, besides, first of all, just letting them go and going, hey, you don't want to fight. You just want to run away. Come on. I thought you're a man. You want to come and fight. Come on. Yeah. I'm here. Stop running away. All right? If you want to run away, then you have to concede you lost this fight. Mm-hmm. But if some dude is just running away from you in an enclosed space, you're eventually going to catch him, which is what happened to Wong Jack Man. You cannot keep running in an enclosed space. But to say that, as Leo Fong said, Bruce said, if only I had learned hooks and uppercut, which is kind of weird. You know why? if Bruce, the reason why I tend to doubt that story a little bit, all right, is because how would Bruce know what hooks and uppercuts were if he didn't know what hooks and uppercuts were? Okay, so
Okay.
you
Right.
understand? It's like it's like the solution to your problem. You thought about it for years.
Oh man!
Now, of course, maybe he told Wong, maybe he told Liu Feng that story years
Years later. Okay.
I'm sure everyone's gonna
Years
no,
later.
no, Mr. Kung Fu Genius. You
That
don't
was-
understand. That was much later when he
Yeah.
told him that or whatever. But it just seems like
That's probably the story he told himself.
It's the story he
Yeah.
told himself about what Bruce Lee told him. But given the fact that Bruce Lee knew a little bit about Choi Lei Fut, which uses odd angle punches, knew a little bit about different martial arts, knew a
he
little
knew
bit
some
about
boxing.
judo. Yeah,
Yeah.
and here's the thing.
Yeah.
You bring up a great point. Bruce Lee had a boxing match
Yeah.
in Hong Kong prior to that. So
Right.
Bruce did not know about hooks and uppercuts, okay? This is
Okay.
part of the reason why I tend to think some of the stuff that Liu Feng said about Bruce Lee had a little bit of an aroma around it.
No.
I don't know about this, right?
Can be.
But Bruce did say that Wing Chun only had this. But when you're in a fight, as Bruce Lee was definitely that, I don't care if you're a Wing Chun guy. If you're in a fight, you're going to throw whatever the hell you think's going to work in that moment, okay? And so I always found that was a little spurious. So my conclusion is, I agree with what Bruce Lee did given what he knew. But I'm happy to have learned the classical Wing Chun system to realize that there were a lot of things that he didn't learn. And having learned it, I mean, you never finish learning it. It's always a process. But having learned the dummy and the pole and the knives and everything like that, I have an appreciation for that which Bruce Lee didn't see, but I also have an understanding for what he understood. When it comes to fighting, we have a you don't need everything in the art to fight. Just like even in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu,
Right.
if you're fighting on the street, you don't need to know every single collar choke and barimbolos and gi chokes or whatever.
No.
You just need to take down, pin the guy,
And-
put him in a
and-
choke, right?
and that's it.
You know what what
Keep it
what an
simple.
entire art has versus the toolkit for self-defense versus the toolkit for a street fight versus the toolkit for fighting another martial artist. These are all different conversations, right? And I love the Jeet Kune Do philosophy. But kind of, I think once you learn a traditional style of martial arts, especially as like, let's say the head of the school like I am, you do have to unshackle yourself from certain dogmatic ideas in order to improve it. But if you unshackled yourself as a beginner who didn't know anything, then you wouldn't be having an open mind. You'd be having an undisciplined one. And that's all I got to say about that. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications. And if you have any topic ideas for a future episode, go ahead and put those in the comments below. And please support us on Patreon. The link for that is below as well. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.
And if you have any ideas for a future episode of the Kung Fu Genius, put them in the comments below. And if you want me to ask, or if you want to ask, f*** you. All right? Sorry.
All right, peoples. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering one question from Patreon. Lots of gems, lots of adaptations. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering one question from Patreon! On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be genius. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering. All right, peeps.
Trey, take a breath.
The genius will be answering one question from the Patreons. All right, peeps. Lots of gems, lots of adaptation, and lots of. Forgot what the third one was. Lots of gems, lots of adaptations, lots of, the KFG knows the politics.
Oh, dear
The KFG knows about JKD politics, and he still doesn't give a f.
No, we're not editing that together.
Lots of, the KFG knows. Lots of, the KFG knows about JKD politics, and he still doesn't give a f. Lots of, the KFG knows about JKD politics, and he still doesn't give a f. Lots of, the KFG knows about JKD politics, and he still doesn't give a f. Lots of, the KFG knows JKD politics, and he still doesn't give a Let's get to it.
Do one more time.
He can squeeze the pauses together.
There's not so much pause.
That's the cadence.
It's just.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of The Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering one question from the Patreons. Lots of gems, lots of adaptation, lots of, the KFG knows. All right, let's go, brother.